Jim, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Alan.
You run a petrochemical company,
Right.
and I'm sure there's some people out in the audience who are saying, what the heck is he doing here? I thought petrochemicals were the problem, not part of the solution. How do you respond to that?
Well, petrochemicals enable a lot of things that we do every day to be more energy efficient. So if you can imagine, the products that we make typically have 2 to 3 times the impact on greenhouse gas reduction than the materials we use to make them. Insulation materials, for example, lightweighting automobiles, making packaging lighter weight and stronger, eco-friendly products that you use every day. So there's a lot of what we do that really goes into a more sustainable economy.
But you're seeing a reaction out there. We had an interesting story in the magazine about Ball Corporation, and
Right.
how well they've done in the last year because people are moving from plastic bottles to aluminum bottles. You're seeing a kind of an anti-petrochemical mood in the public.
Right. We see moves like this from time to time. So, you know, the move that's been made over the last decades to plastics has been because it's the most sustainable and environmentally friendly package that's out there. It's easy to say shift back to aluminum because you don't like the plastic waste issue, but aluminum requires 60% more energy and gives off 60% more greenhouse gas emissions to produce aluminum or recycle aluminum than plastics. If you go to steel or glass, it's even more. And so I think what you're dealing with is the emotional response to the plastic waste issue, which we all agree is an issue that needs to be tackled, versus the real response, which is if you want to get to circularity, let's get to circularity with these materials, and we can do it in a more efficient way.
I want to get back to the plastic issue in a minute, but can you talk about some of the other things you're doing? You've taken this sustainability commitment very seriously. I read through your sustainability report. You have a lot of different projects going on that you think contribute.
We have a tremendous number. Look, if you look from a sustainability standpoint, the things that are very important to us, obviously climate change. We are a big user of energy, and so we do emit greenhouse gas, and so getting those emissions down and using new technology to do that is a big change for us. Putting circularity into the economy, so making sure that all the products that we do make have the potential to be recycled, and then working on the projects in the communities to help actually recycle them. Looking at eco-friendly products, so I'm not talking about everything being bio-based, but I'm talking about using chemistry that's cleaner to make some of the materials that you use every day. Chemistry that's effective but maybe not as toxic as some of the historical chemistries that have been used. And then obviously dealing with the plastic waste issue and dealing with the infrastructure that's needed really to keep up with the consumption of this world plus the consumption that's going to come when we have another 1.5 billion people coming on the planet.
Yeah, so let's go a little deeper into the plastic waste issue because that's one of the big focuses of the next 3 days. And it's an area where we seem to have moved backwards. Recycling has kind of collapsed for plastic products. What happened there?
I think there's a lack of infrastructure in general to deal with the waste that we generate today as a society, and that's what we're trying to tackle. Plastics is at the tip of the spear because this is what everybody sees or experiences. So let me give you an example. There's a city in the Philippines called Dagupan. It's a little fishing village, and for the last generation, they haven't been able to do as much fishing, and it's really hurt their quality of life, mainly because the beach there has been turned into a trash dump. Now, this seems like an immediate thing, like this happened overnight, but the villagers there would say this has been happening over a long time. So when you go see this problem, that trash dump, which is not managed, ends up with that waste washing into the ocean. And we're in a situation right now where you've got that situation in Asia many times. You have 10 rivers out here that are contributing 90% of this plastics that gets into the ocean. So people say, well, why is that? It's a plastics problem. Actually, our argument is it's a waste problem because we have a linear economy, and our economy is designed to take these things and throw them away and move them out. Or even worse, we have an economy where people's waste gets collected in a developing world curbside every week or through a recycling facility, and we think it's going to be recycled, but it actually isn't. It might go to a landfill because that's cheaper, or it might get on a ship and be shipped to someplace in Southeast Asia and put on a beach somewhere. So we have to deal with infrastructure. I'll go to Thailand right after this, and Thailand is a great case in point. Here in the last generation, Thailand has moved from a very poor economy to an upper middle class economy. It's been a very big success story. But the infrastructure there hasn't kept up either with the waste management issue. And so what we have to do as a society, is recognize that this is a problem that has many participants. It's not just a plastics producer's issue. It's not just a consumer issue or a consumer brand company issue or a government issue, a local issue. It's all of the above because our system is designed to be linear. Use something, throw it away.
So you played a leadership role in putting together an alliance to deal with this. So how do you do that? I mean, we're sitting here near the headwaters of two of those rivers you referred to,
right.
The Pearl River, the Mekong River.
Right.
The immense amounts of plastic waste that are going into those rivers. How do you create an ecosystem that changes that?
Well, you have to bring together a lot of different partners. I often call the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, I think, the largest public-private partnership that's ever been created in our industry.
Really?
It's $1.5 billion raised so far. We've got 42 companies in it, including Sinopec, who was just here on stage. It's partners throughout the value chain. It's waste management companies, it's resin producers, consumer brand companies, retailers, packaging producers, recycling companies, and NGOs. And what we're doing is we're trying to find solutions to the problem. So for example, we have a project right now with a company called Renew Oceans that's starting in the Ganges in India. It's starting in Varanasi. It's looking at collecting the waste that typically gets dumped into the Ganges and converting that through a process into a useful fuel that can be used locally there. We're working on projects right now that are looking at multiple use recycling facilities. So imagine a facility, a municipal facility, where you would bring in waste and you could not only mechanically recycle it, you could chemically recycle it back into an oil that I could use back into the plastics manufacturing process. You could potentially make products at that facility. You have a waste to energy facility there, and then a small amount of what you produce there would probably have to go to landfill because it's not able to be converted. Those kinds of projects are what the Alliance is trying to...
And a critical piece of that is actually having an end use for it's creating an economic incentive to collect the waste.
We do need to create demand. We've tried to create demand in a variety of ways. PET bottle, a drinking water bottle, can be converted back to a PET bottle or fiber. That's probably the easiest plastic to convert. They're harder to convert plastics. We can convert them into infrastructure materials like building blocks. We can put them into asphalt mixtures to make stronger, more durable roadways. We're doing that.
I'm sorry, where are you doing that now?
We've done that in Thailand, India, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam thus far. In Asia, we've done it in Texas, and we've done it in Michigan.
Amazing.
In the United
States. And it makes the roads better.
The work we did in Thailand, and they were first to partner up with us, with Siam Cement, our local partner there, and the work we did with Chulalongkorn University shows that those roads are 30 to 40% stronger, more durable, and they also have better traction in a wet situation, a rainy situation.
Yeah. So what is it going to take to get these efforts to critical mass? It's scale that matters at the end of the day.
So what we're working on right now is we're working on places where there's a need. We're trying to tackle on-land infrastructure. 80% of the waste that goes out to the ocean starts on land. Tackle the on-land waste so it doesn't get out there. We're looking for partnerships with communities that have a need and then bringing in technology. So if we can prove out a concept like a mixed recycling facility, like a chemical recycling facility, and we can find that local need. We will bring in capital partners like Circulate Capital, who's one of our partners, money from the Alliance to help de-risk the investment. The Alliance is a 501c3, so we can do some things to help fund it, to de-risk it for other investors, private investors. But ultimately, what we want to do is create a business model on the ground where that facility can stand on its own 2 feet, and then once we prove it, replicate it in other locations.
So can you talk about how much of your personal time these days is spent on this issue? I mean, in a way, this is kind of a back-end issue. You make plastic, you sell plastic, and then this is about what happens after that.
Easily 25% of my time is spent on this issue because for us, it is the circular economy issue of our industry, and it has to be tackled. And it hasn't been tackled thus far, I think because it's too complicated. The industry can do a lot of things. I mean, we're not waste management companies, but we're going to bring waste management players in. And what happens at a local community level is they get overwhelmed with the size of a project like this. They need partners to come in. So let's say you or I got sick with a real serious illness. We'd have a whole team of doctors or medical experts to help us. There'd be a whole collaboration of specialists to try to help us get better. A little community in the Philippines or somewhere in Southeast Asia, they don't have that for the environment. So they need a lot of help. They need waste management expertise on how to collect this and sort this material. How do you build a facility like this? Who's going to bring in the technology that can mechanically recycle it, chemically recycle it? What products are you going to make to create demand for that? How does that get converted back? Even if you want to convert a package back to a package, how do you make it acceptable for a brand owner to go back into their stream? That's what we can do with the Alliance, and that's why you have to have the whole value chain in there.
Do you ever get questions from your board of directors saying, hey, why are you spending 25% of your time on this recycling stuff? We don't make our money off of recycling.
Actually, our board has spent more time this year on climate change and plastics recycling than just about anything else we've done. They believe that it's a purpose that we have to tackle. They have believed it for a long time. So that sustainability report that you've got is not just the culmination of last year's work. This is our 3rd decade of putting out these long-range sustainability goals. The first decade was really dealing with our operations footprint just inside the fence line. The second decade started to deal with how our products perform. And the 3rd decade is how do we design a blueprint for a society that can be more sustainable and more circular. They're completely supportive of it. I would also say the financial market is changing as well. You start to see the importance of ESG financing, ESG reporting coming into play now, and that sustainability report you've got is not only aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, it's GRI reporting methodology, and it's third-party audited. So I think it's a best-in-class example of what ESG reporting can be.
Do you ever see, or does your board ever see any tension between pursuing that social purpose and pursuing profit?
I don't think tension. I think our view is they have to you have to do both, right? You can't be a stock on the New York Stock Exchange and not pursue profit. But you have to challenge yourself to say, I have to do both. I have to pursue profit, but I have to run a business that's long-term sustainable. And if that plastic waste issue is an existential threat, how do I tackle that and still maintain my business long-term?
Because that will get you in the long run.
And you have to change the business model. You have to change the types of materials. So for example, one of the first challenges I would give to my plastics business people is 100% of everything you make needs to be recyclable. That's a big goal. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get recycled. Now we've got to go work on what happens at the local level to make sure that it actually gets collected and gets recycled. And when you get into that mode, you're dealing with existing systems that are out there today, sometimes that work against you. So sometimes when your recycling gets collected curbside in the States or maybe in Europe, you think it's going to be recycled, but what you find out is the most expedient thing to do is to landfill it or put it on a ship and ship it somewhere else. That isn't addressing the issue. So we have to step up and address the issue, and if we don't, who's going to help drive that solution?
I want to open it up to questions in just a minute, but before I do, can you talk a little bit about the work you're doing with the Chinese government?
We do a lot of work in partnership with the Chinese government. We've worked with them on areas like workplace safety, so sharing best practices on how you run a safe workplace in the chemical industry. Hazard evaluation, chemical classification, so how do you measure that, and how do you drive policies that are going to protect the environment from that standpoint? Environmental operations, so what do we do in environmental operations that allow us to have a better, let's say, more of a closed loop system, recycling of water, instead of using water once and discharging it. How do you keep it in plant, recycle it, and use it again and again?
And what's your sense of China's approach to these issues compared to other countries you're working with?
Oh, I think it's gotten very serious, especially over the last 5 years. There's been a big move, starting in the energy industry, I think, when the air pollution issues brought in the reality that if they continued to build coal-fired plants, they were not going to be able to solve the air quality issues. That really drove the initiative, but I think it's gotten broader than that. And I've seen a definite change in operations here.
Questions, comments? Yep. Yes, please.
Hi.
And please identify yourself before the
Yes,
question.
Jill Baker from Terra Alpha Investments. You mentioned several different models for these mini facilities. And I was interested in the US, where we have a dearth of recycling infrastructure. What is the most sort of high ROI or feasible structure for those plants? You mentioned potentially chemical recycling, creating oil and using waste energy. What kind of sort of local offtake agreement do you think is most realistic?
We're working on, there's a project right now that the American Chemistry Council is working on up in the Northwest United States. I think it's Washington State, to try to look at a mixed use, a municipal recycling facility that would have all of those. So advanced sorting capabilities, mechanical recycling, chemical recycling, and also waste to energy on site. And so there will have to be, because not all materials will be able to be fully recycled, waste to energy is an issue that we need to take a look at as well. And then the other thing that we're trying to incorporate here is how do you create a business model that could also compound some of those materials into a product that could be sold out of the facility. So how do you create a revenue stream that comes out of it? Create a demand for the second life. So some of us have worked with manufacturers and small companies, for example, that make infrastructure projects like building blocks. So you can make a plastic building block that looks a lot like a concrete block or a Lego block. It's very substantial. It can be used to make lower cost structures, but they'll be durable structures that can last 20, 30 years. You can look at asphalt materials for infrastructure, so putting it into paving. And we're looking at, obviously, you've seen a lot of high-profile announcements around turning it into fibers and using it in footwear and in clothing and in textiles. So there are a lot of applications like that.
Where is Christian Reining-Tonneson here in the... Can I put you on the spot? Can we get a microphone down here? I just want to reopen an interesting conversation the two of you were having earlier, because Christian asked you the question, geez, why are we trying to improve our use of fossil fuel-based products? Why don't we just make the leap and get off of it altogether and move to completely renewables? You said, not in our lifetime, basically.
Well, I didn't. I said it's going to take time for us to do this, right? And so when you think about it, the world needs, we use a lot of renewables. We'll use 750 megawatts of renewables by 2025, and most of it's wind. It's in Europe and it's in the United States. In Texas, we're one of the largest wind users that's there. So where we can, we will. But the type of assets that we run are multi-billion-dollar facilities, and they demand 24/7 reliability. Reliability to where you can't have an interruption of milliseconds, or else you take a big machine down, and that's a huge risk to our operation. So that kind of reliability, in a lot of cases, doesn't exist with the alternatives. So we're working on processes that can allow us to continue to grow, but also have a step change reduction in CO2 emissions.
I think you said it best, 50% in the foreseeable future.
20 to 40%, which are massive reductions for the size of an industry that we are. But for the foreseeable future, we're going to still be needing to use fossil fuels to help us drive that.
And Christian, you take a different view, I gather.
Yeah, Christian Rønning-Tønnesen from Statkraft Norway. So we are the biggest producer of renewable energy in Europe. And our modeling is showing that we can have around 80% renewable electricity in a diversified system, and it could still be high reliability 24/7, 80%.
80% by when?
Well, technically, we are there already. Norway is 99%. But for the total world to get there, our model shows we will get there in 2050.
2050.
2050. To reach the whole world on 80% renewable energy is possible with the reliability we require, which is exactly what you described. You need it every millisecond. But we think that is possible in electricity. And in addition to that, we need to work on all the raw materials that you just explained. But we also need the electricity to be dominantly renewable as soon as possible.
And I think, obviously the other thing you need to factor in is what is the cost of doing all this. So there is a cost to making it happen. As we talked about at lunch, there's been a lot of discussion around putting taxes on carbon to try to drive that move to a sustainable future. I don't think the industry has any pushback on taxes on carbon or an emission trading system, but is that money going to go to driving the sustainable economy? Because most governments today are running a deficit or not balanced.
Your fear is those taxes would just go to fund general expenses.
And a lot of times that's what happens. And
but
so,
that could still have positive environmental effects.
Not sure. I don't know that we've seen that. I don't think that there's any proof of that. But I think we'd be better off if we want to drive to 2050 to this renewable goal, to making sure that monies that were collected from a tax scheme like that went toward the solution and not towards just general funds.
Yeah, just saying, I completely agree. There should be a meaningful, that is a reasonable high price on carbon, and ideally it should go back to move technology. But it does help, even if it is not fully going back.
Even if it doesn't go back.
The price itself drives development, but it's better if the money is spent technologically as well.
And the other thing we talked about was waste to energy, or biomass to energy, is also one of the solutions, right? And so one of the challenges we run up against when we talk about plastic waste is talking about waste to energy. But in reality, we're going to have to look at that as a source for energy as we want to move forward.
Other questions, comments? Cliff, and then, well, let me go back here first. Can we get a microphone right back here, please? Keep your hand up so they can see you. Thank you. And please identify yourself before your question.
Thank you. Cecilia Tortajada, National University of Singapore. Today at lunchtime, you mentioned the importance of water. Climate change is not only about temperatures, but about water. And you mentioned the challenges in your operations of having or not having reliable sources of water. How much do alternative sources of water, are they important for your operations? Like in Singapore, every time more the government is using the recycling wastewater.
Right, water is, in the petrochemical industry, in addition to energy or electricity, we also use a lot of steam, and we use water for cooling as well. So those are two big sources that we need. Typically, we look at the quality of that, and we also look at the availability when we decide to site a plant. Every place is different, and places change over time. So as the climate has changed, you know, some places become challenged for water. Historically, when a plant would get built, you would think about using water once. Maybe you would build near a water source like a river or a lake, and you would use cooling water and put it back into the lake after it had been treated. More and more, as we design, Terneuzen in the Netherlands is a great example, where we look at a full use, a full circle, complete water reuse program at the plant. And if you do that in conjunction with the public, a couple of things can happen. In Terneuzen, we were having some real struggles with public availability of water, so we did a public-private partnership with them, and not only were we able to recycle 100% of what we use at the site, we're also able to get our energy costs down and get our greenhouse gas emissions down by 60,000 tons, and allow the city to have better use of pure water. So there are some solutions that are out there that can drive us to the next level. A lot depends on what you're trying to do with the water at the site, but there's more and more investment going into closing that loop, keeping it on site, and recover and reuse.
And about the quality of the discharges, how are they being improved?
Quality, in our case, we monitor the quality of everything that we produce, and we collect our plants are designed so that inside the fence line, any rain runoff gets collected, and we treat that in our treatment facilities. It's determined locally, but we can measure items down to very, very low levels, and we use those limits to work with the local authorities before we would ever discharge anything to a public stream.
Remarkable. Cliff, I know you had a question, but the clock is at 0. Sasha is giving me that look you're very familiar with, so I think we have to leave it at that. But Jim, thank you.
Alan,
Great discussion.
thank you.
Fascinating.
Thanks very much.